It's been nearly 7 years since the deadly Marjory Stoneman Douglas high school mass shooting. Now a film entitled Death by Numbers is telling the story of one of the survivors, Sam Fuentes, as she works to reclaim her power and confront the gunman who wounded her. The movie is on the Oscars shortlist for Best Documentary, a documentary short film. Take a look.
I think being able to directly address him is just another form of justice because he affected my life in not just a literal, physical way, but in a psychological and mental and emotional way that will be everlasting. And I didn't get to choose that. So if I get to choose anything, it will be this. People can remember up to 10,000 faces, with the average person able to recall around 5,000. Maybe if I meet 10,000 more people, your face will not be so clearly imprinted in my mind. But you will not be so lucky. You will not be able to forget mine.
Joining us now, the subject and writer of the documentary short film, Sam Fuentes. Also with us, Peabody Award-winning director and producer of Death by Numbers, Kim A. Snyder. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Sam, I'm so moved by your story. Just reading here the words that you delivered to the killer himself, and I believe it was his sentencing. I just want to read from that because I have a question coming out of it about Death by Numbers. But this is a victim impact statement just before the shooter was sentenced to life in prison. And you said to him, "I was still a child when I saw you standing in the window, peering into my Holocaust studies class, holding your AR-15 that had swastikas, ironically, scratched into it. I was still a child when I saw you kill 2 of my friends. You shot me in my leg. And if you looked me in the face, you would see scars from hard shrapnel that was latched into it." From that moment and all the trauma around it, to shooting after shooting after shooting that happens after, can you explain the impact of the reality that these continue almost on a weekly basis, sometimes daily?
Yeah. So when I wrote Death by Numbers, I was contemplating so many different themes. For one thing, hate. The shooter was somebody who I believed was subscribed to an ideology of bigotry and hatred. And unfortunately, when these kinds of individuals have access to deadly firearms, this is when the real violence and the real evil takes force. And oftentimes we don't recognize it as hate and as bigotry. And for one thing, that hate in many ways, from all the way up to the perpetrator of the crime, to the victims of the crime, that kind of violence just reverberates through a community. As a result of the shooting that happened in my high school, 3 students had killed themselves because of it at the hands of a firearm. This project was particularly important to me, not just because of the issue of gun violence that is ever growing and doesn't seem to hold up, but also to talk about the aftermath and the trauma that happens afterwards, that is always ongoing. And so I wanted this issue to be much more personal because it is. And as a survivor, I have the privilege of being able to shed some light on this real kind of pain.
So tell us about Death by Numbers.
Yeah, Death by Numbers, well, I was writing it during a time where I was digesting and reconciling with a lot of my trauma. And the importance of Death by Numbers, I feel, not only is it to unpack the grief and the trauma and the pain that happens in a community, that happens individually, that happens among families, but also to recognize that my shooter wasn't unique, and that these issues are happening all along the country, and that there are pockets in this country that are full of collective hate And I wanted to think about what real justice looked like for the survivors of these shootings, what the actual aftermath is, what the actual trauma is. And so I felt that standing up to my shooter was one way of being able to come not to just to terms with what happened to me,
right,
but what this country is unfortunately full of, which is hate, which is violence, which
this is a narrative this morning, Mike Marnicle. We keep talking about hate's pocket of hate, social media driving hate.
Yeah, it is a narrative. And unfortunately, in Sam's case, and Kim, I'd like you to answer how you tell Sam's story, because it's what you would refer to as a forever act. It never goes away. In Sam's mind, obviously, every day, no matter what Sam does each and every day, it's a forever act. How do you chronicle that?
Well, my producing partner, Maria Cuomo Cole, and I have been in the space of storytelling for over 10 years, starting with a film called Newtown. And Sam and I have collaborated on this for almost 6 years. Our relationship has been close, and we were so inspired by her writing of Death by Numbers, the piece, that we decided to adapt it. And Sam has said it beautifully. It really goes beyond guns. It really is speaking to collective hate. And the idea that, yes, we have this gun problem where we're a complete outlier in the world, but I think at the hands of an unstable person with access to assault weapons, this just keeps happening, and we have, invariably become inured. And so we wanted to raise awareness to specifically youth trauma around the issue of gun violence through the piece and through the poetic intercutting of her trial. And something that really hasn't been seen, which is most of these shooters don't live through it. This one did. And Sam's courage to confront this scariest moment in person in her life.
So Sam, what would you hope, someone who's watching this, what would you hope their takeaway would be? How do you hope that person would view something differently, or perhaps try to change something in themselves or outside?
Yeah, certainly. Well, for one thing, I would hope that people walk away from this understanding that the issue of gun violence isn't just one that goes away once it disappears from the headlines. That they could walk away with this and have conversations of gun violence in all forms, not just mass shootings, because it isn't just an issue of mass shootings, at their dining room tables. I hope that this film compels them to take action, but I also hope that the film allows them to be more conscious of the aftermath and what life looks like after this violence happens. And unfortunately, gun violence has been an everlasting issue, but it doesn't have to be. And so I hope this compels people to want to take action.
Sam Fuentes and Kim A. Snyder, thank you both very much for coming on the show this morning. And for more information on the film, you can visit deathbynumbersthefilm.com.